It is a pleasure to be at St. Augustine, a pleasure to be on the campus of the President of the Inter-American Commission. This is the third set of meetings we've had hosted by the Institute of Gender and Development Studies. And I can't say enough the gratitude which we have to have to Ms. Hackett, to Gayatri, to the entire staff, who with very short notice allowed us to share time with you. And this is really a listening visit. So I say a little bit about the Inter-American system, but mostly we want to hear from you, your insights. We already have a sense of the important work being done in the other institutes in relation to violence against women, and they're providing us with extraordinary insights into the situation in the 4 countries we have visited. I also want to thank the Faculty of Law that has offered us access to this room through the Dean. I wanted to say a little bit about the Commission. A 7-person body made up of persons from 34 member states of the OAS. So the region here is not the Caribbean region, it's all of the Americas. There are 2 of us from the Caribbean, 2 of the 7, and it is a quasi-judicial body with a responsibility to promote and protect human rights. When I say quasi-judicial, it means that the Commission receives about 2,000 petitions a year. In other words, complaints throughout the region. And we also receive requests for precautionary measures, which in our systems would be equivalent of injunctions. So for example, we're granting precautionary measures to women in camps in Haiti after the earthquake who were at risk and suffering sexual violence. Our petitions, one of the first petitions ever received by an international human rights body in relation to violence against women as a human rights violation, came from Indravani Ramachan, who was then on death row in Trinidad and Tobago for having been part of the common enterprise in killing a man who had been violent towards her and imprisoned her for a number of days after many, many years of violence and many attempts by her to escape. That case was resolved in the domestic courts in the Court of Appeal, and ultimately the Inter-American Commission didn't need to issue a merits report on the case. Gayatri was one of the counsel for Ms. Ramchatan, and it represents nevertheless an important moment in the life of the Inter-American human rights system in which a victim of violence approached the Commission to make the claim, which is the one you have heard Rashida Manchu making over and over again, that violence against women is a human rights violation. The Inter-American Commission is part of the Inter-American human rights system, which is made up of both the Commission and the Court. Ariane Griffith, who is here with us, just came from a long internship, a 4-month internship at the Court. And our hope is that over time, many more Caribbean people will be integrally engaged with the Commission and the Court, not just in seeking the help of the institutions, but shaping the vision as members of staff. Our monitoring work also helps to support the protection of human rights, and that means we do country visits. This is not an official country visit, but we have done a number of visits in relation to violence against women. 2 years ago, we were in Canada looking at the situation of missing and murdered Indigenous women in Canada, and we've recently issued a report in relation to the same. We have public hearings, which have become very significant in highlighting the situation in the Americas. In the March period of public hearings, there was a hearing on the Equal Opportunities Commission of Trinidad and Tobago. If you haven't had an opportunity to look at it, have a look at it and hear from the 3 organizations, civil society organizations in Trinidad and Tobago, who brought information about the need for the expansion of the Equal Opportunity Act, but also the promise of the Equal Opportunity Commission as a potential fully fledged national human rights machinery in Trinidad and Tobago, which is a direction all Caribbean countries should be moving towards. I want to also point out that in the promotion of human rights, it's been incredibly important for the Commission to also learn more about the Caribbean. So being here is a way in which, even though I'm from the Caribbean, institutionally it's been important for us to ensure that the Commission itself understands the region. So last year, Professor Rhoda Reddock made a presentation to a high-level meeting at the OAS of ambassadors from all the member states, but primarily CARICOM, to talk about sexuality and gender, and in the context of resistance from CARICOM member states to issues related to LGBTI persons. And so her presentation was having a conversation with a regional expert and CARICOM member states, but other member states as well, about important issues related to sexuality and gender as an opening to a dialogue with states in CARICOM and the OAS about these issues. I would only say that our normative framework for thinking about violence against women is the Belém do Pará Convention, which is the first global convention on violence against women and has formed the basis of both implementation strategies, monitoring mechanisms within the OAS, and now a fairly expansive jurisprudence within the Inter-American system on violence against women. I'd highlight a few key parts of that jurisprudence. Rashida mentioned the duty of states to exercise due diligence in addressing violence against women, preventing it, providing protection, investigating properly, punishing, and repairing and ensuring that there's appropriate redress. And we have often had to emphasize that in the process of doing that, all states must have regard for the dignity of the victim and her family, and that there's a duty not to re-victimize her in the process of investigating and doing justice, and to provide her and her family with access to information, which allows her to be in control of processes which integrally affect her life. I would say one of the things which we have also noticed is gaps in states that have introduced measures. So we have integral laws related to violence against women in many Latin American countries, not in the Caribbean, or not the English-speaking Caribbean, but even as we have had that expansion in the development of laws, we have not seen an equal responsiveness to the implementation of those laws, and then challenges in monitoring and evaluating all the policies which have been introduced by states. And I'd say one of the most significant gaps we notice is the absence of mechanisms of accountability for the state officials who have duties to us. And I want to mention two particular spheres in particular, especially. One is the health sector. Very little accountability of healthcare professionals in the performance of their duties, and equally the police. And I would say the accountability mechanisms for judges are a little bit different because of judicial independence, but they're nonetheless important. I want to also mention how the definition of violence against women under the convention is now better understood, and the Inter-American system has continued to emphasize how broad we understand the issue of violence against women to be, but over time, we've begun to develop even more refined ideas. So in the last few years, there's no legislation in some Latin American countries, Venezuela, for example, in relation to obstetric violence. Terminology which I don't think we use yet in the Caribbean, but if you can even think about it a little bit, you can have a sense of how many women face violence in the context of childbearing or making decisions about childbearing, whether to or not. I also want to mention, as another important theme, the question which Rashida has raised in some of her reports of institutional violence. So sometimes we think of the violence as solely in relation to private actors against other private actors, and we don't take into account the ways in which institutions, particularly state institutions themselves, in the way in which they deal with women, are in fact inflicting forms of violence against them. I want to also mention the importance for us in the Inter-American system of a differentiated approach, so that the approach in relation to violence against women can't be the same for all women, because women aren't equally situated in relation to violence. And so particularly poor women, women in rural areas. We give far more attention to in the inter-American system today than we did many years ago to lesbians, bisexual women, trans women in the context of our work and the distinct particularities of violence that they face. But also, a lot of our early work has also talked about the specificities of violence against indigenous women and the importance of differentiated approaches which apply to those women as well. So I would say the inter-American system has also been particularly interested of late in the relationship between sexual and reproductive rights and violence against women, in understanding what connections exist between the two. Everywhere in the Americas I go, feminists have a discussion with us about sexual and reproductive rights, and it's extremely important, and this is one of the most contested issues relating to women's human rights. The Inter-American Commission on International Women's Day this year drew attention to sexual and reproductive rights as women's human rights and the importance of both the Commission and states giving full attention to these considerations, as challenging and difficult and controversial as they are, and they're really critical issues relating to access to information as part of the full provision of sexual and reproductive rights for women. I'm going to wrap up, but I wanted to say in ending the significance of this particular study visit for the Inter-American Human Rights Commission. We have prepared a report based on a 2008 visit for Jamaica. We have made no other comparable visit to English-speaking countries in the Caribbean. This is the first time we are in 4 countries in the space of a short period of time. This visit is going to impact many aspects of our work. I also want to say personally the significance of having the opportunity to do this with Rashida. We're both feminists from the South. We both share not exactly the same history, although we have overlapped in South Africa and other places at different times, at slightly different moments. That this represents for us a way of hearing and sharing with organizations which have a responsibility to our region key information about violence against women, but also as persons who have been committed in this area long before we had our official mandates to signaling our commitment to these issues, or commitment to working with others on these questions. And I particularly, as a member of the university community, want to indicate my gratitude again. And I hope that this will bear fruit, not only this dialogue, but the dialogues across